Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we're going to be dealing with what we used to call in school days a horse of a book. I mean, it's big, baby. It's big. And it goes on and on and on. And it's a wonderful book. It has a title of Far from the Tree. Subtitle is very important: Parents, Children, and the Search for Identity. The author is Andrew Solomon. He's joined us today as publisher of Scribner's. Welcome aboard.
What a treat to be here.
Thank you for coming. It says of you in the biographical spot on the back flap that you're the author of some other books, Noonday Demon and Atlas of Depression, which was a Pulitzer Prize finalist and winner of 14 national awards, including the 2001 National Book Award. It's a New York Times bestseller and is published in 22 languages. How many languages is this book in?
Well, this book only came out a week ago in English, so there's a ways to go, but it's been sold in 7 so far.
7 so far?
Yes.
But none of them have appeared?
Not yet.
Oh, my gosh, 7 already. You're a lecturer in psychiatry at Cornell University and special advisor on LGBT affairs at Yale's Department of Psychiatry. So that's your background, a wonderful background to do this fantastic book. The piece that we get from the publisher tells us that Scribner is publishing with conspicuous surprise. It's cold, this book is, from 10 years of research, 40,000 pages of interview transcripts from conversations with more than 300 families across America. Wow.
Thank you.
When did you decide that was the way to look at this issue of special, what you might call special parenting, or the parenting of special children?
About 20 years ago, my editors at the Times Magazine asked me to write a piece about the deaf. And I was a little bewildered. I'd mostly been doing foreign reporting, and my editor said, this is a foreign culture within our own society. And when I went out to write...
What an excellent point, huh?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent.
When I went out and started meeting deaf people, I thought deafness really is a culture. It's not my culture, and I don't especially want to join it. But deaf theater, deaf clubs, the Miss Deaf America contest, I went to all of this stuff, and I thought, it's really a culture and a life. And most deaf children are born to hearing parents. They don't find their way into that until adolescence. And I said, gee, it's exactly like being the gay child of straight parents.
Yeah.
And that was the origin of the whole project.
Wow. And so in total, do you remember how many interviews you did?
Well, as I said, I mean, at some point I tabulated them, and it was more than 300 families, some of whom I interviewed once briefly, and some of whom I interviewed 37 times. So it was a lot of interviews.
Yeah, there are some that you spent weeks with.
Yeah.
Or it seems to me from reading the book. Wow. At the core of your methodology for the book, I find two distinctions, and I think I'm right. There may be more. The first difference is the difference between vertical and horizontal identities. What do you mean by that?
So vertical identities are identities that get passed down generationally, things that a parent has in common with his child. So your ethnicity is a vertical identity. Your nationality usually is. Your language, frequently your religion. So they're all things where you and your parents have this thing in common. And so your parents tend to reinforce a good self-image with that included from an early age.
Mm-hmm.
Horizontal identities are when someone is born with a condition that is alien to his parents, that they've never had any opportunity to encounter before, and therefore that he has to learn as an identity from a peer group rather than at home. And those identities are the ones that parents have tended to find alienating, disturbing, foreign, and often have tried to curtail or change or eliminate rather than building up the child's confidence in them.
And that being gay would be one of those.
Would be a horizontal. I mean, it would be a horizontal. Identity. Sorry, I get turned around.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, my parents were straight. I was gay. They didn't know what to do with it. They had to figure out a way through. You know, it presented its challenges for us.
God bless them. I think they did pretty well, finally. And then the other difference that I picked up was the difference, and this is very important, between illness and identity. For example, gayness for a very long time was considered an illness. And once you say illness, a whole other bunch of things, snap into place. And the issue that you're talking about is spoken of, addressed in a certain way.
It was an illness. Anyone who was identified as gay was likely to receive treatment. Time magazine, writing when I was a kid, described it as nothing but a pernicious sickness, a second-rate and pitiable flight from reality. And now the President of the United States is in support of gay marriage. And furthermore, California has just recently passed a law outlawing conversion therapies, which were the rule. And I feel like if gayness can change from an illness to an identity, then what else can make the same changes?
Anybody. It would seem to me that's the answer. And we really are moving. I mean, I think there are times when we feel it isn't, good enough, it isn't right yet, and we get disgusted and upset. But we are moving.
They're fluid categories.
Okay. One of the most surprising things about Far From the Tree is the amount of beauty it contains, because it looks at some things that are generally thought to be not so beautiful. There is beauty in this book. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
Far From the Tree. Parents, Children, and the Search for Identity. That's the book we're talking about today. It's written by Andrew Solomon, published by Scribner, and was mentioned a couple of weeks ago in a medium called the New York Times Book Review. And may I read from that in part?
Do, please.
We could spend the rest of the interview just reading it because it's so positive. This is a passionate and affecting work that will shake up your preconceptions and leave you in a better place. It's a book everyone should read. And, although everyone won't, at a hefty 700 pages of text with more than 100 pages of notes, it's no pocket guide. There's no one who wouldn't be a more imaginative and understanding parent or human being for having done so. And the reviewer, Julie Meyerson, concludes, and yet spending time with the parents of a child so disabled he has to be lifted from his bed with a pulley, Solomon notes that to be in the room with them and their son is to witness a shimmering humanity. Shimmering is one of your favorite adjectives, because you use it in a few other connections, but this is so apt here, a kind of shimmering humanity. It's a phrase that should be smoke-trailed across the sky, or at the very least, stuck on the family fridge. It's also a very accurate description of what he's achieved in this wise and beautiful book. Now, she agrees with me that there is great, great beauty in this in this book. So I congratulate you, and I also congratulate you on the news that when we get our next Times book review, it'll be on the bestseller list there, and it's selling like hotcakes.
Well, hotcakes of a sort, yes.
Yeah, you've not heard hotcakes in a while.
It's true.
I don't know where.
I haven't bought any hotcakes in a while. It was thrilling to get that review because I thought not only that it was so positive, but also that she'd seen what I'd tried to put into the book, and that was very moving to me. No, she really it's the kind of review that maybe comes once, twice in a lifetime. Now, speaking of beauty, one of the places where I think this happens is in the very first chapter. A child, you write, may interpret even well-intentioned efforts to fix him as sinister. And then you quote a fellow by the name of Jim Sinclair, an intersex autistic person, wrote, quote, "When parents say,
I wish my child did not have autism. What they're really saying is, I wish the autistic child I have did not exist, and I had a different, non-autistic child instead. You suggest that we read that again. This is what we hear when you mourn over our existence. This is what we hear when you pray for a cure. This is what we know when you tell us of your fondest hopes and dreams for us, that your greatest wish is that one day we will cease to be, and strangers you can love will move in behind our faces. Will move in behind our faces. Wow.
It's a very powerful statement. One of the things I was looking at throughout this book was the tension between a medical model that's focused on fixing differences and a social model that's based on accepting and celebrating them. And I came down thinking sometimes things need to be fixed and corrected, and sometimes they need to be accepted and celebrated, and that it's a very subtle calculus figuring out which way to go in any instant. I think what he said is quite profoundly true. People have sometimes said to me, well, what would you be like, do you think, if you weren't gay? And I feel like I would be a completely different person. Mm-hmm. I might be quite a happy person. I might be a stockbroker with a wife and 3 kids and having a grand old time in Connecticut, but I wouldn't be me.
Scarsdale.
So Scarsdale, okay. And I think in the same way that what Jim Sinclair is saying is that if you try to imagine your child without this condition, you really are imagining someone else. So you might want your child to have less anxiety, to be better socially integrated, to function more easily. But if you really wish for your child to be transformed at that fundamental level, what you're wishing for contains a rejection of who your child is.
But what you're talking about, parents accepting, are society's misfits. I mean, a whole bunch of them. I mean, you're talking about illness, identity, parent-child, and dynamic, etc. And then you list here there are 10 different kinds of exceptional children: deaf, children with dwarfism, Down syndrome, autism, multiple severe disabilities, or prodigious genius, schizophrenic children, children conceived in rape, children who commit serious crimes, and children who are transgender. And what you're saying is the first step in good parenting with respect to those children, as with any children, is acceptance. But how hard that is.
It's unbelievably hard, and it's an unbelievably slow, complicated process. And what I've said is actually that it's important, it's sort of the old serenity prayer. It's important to fix the things that are readily fixed, to accept the things which cannot be fixed, and to have the wisdom to know which is which. And I found a lot of parents drove themselves crazy trying to fix conditions that were not subject to being fixed, making their children end up feeling more broken and defective than they needed to. But I wouldn't say that nothing needs to be fixed. I would just say it has to be done wisely and cautiously.
But knowing the difference, that's the key, isn't it? I mean, you can drive yourself and everybody around you absolutely nuts.
And I found that some of the time, people who had more energy and more optimism and who seemed like they should have an easier time ended up having a worse time because they were the ones who kept thinking, I can repair this and I can make it right. And then when it turned out they weren't able to, they were the ones who despaired, and they were the ones whose children felt broken. So I just got really interested in looking at how is it parents find meaning in these situations, and I found a lot of parents do. So the parents, for example, of one young man who has Down syndrome, I said to them, what do you make of all of this? They got very involved in changing the way people with Down syndrome are educated. They got very attached to their own child. And his mother said, for my son, I wish I could cure it or make it go away because it's a difficult way to be in the world. Mm-hmm. But speaking for myself, it's made me so much better a person and given me so much more profound an experience of life that speaking for myself, I wouldn't give it up for anything in the world. And I think for people who can get to that point, and it's not easy to get there, it takes a lot of work, once they can get to that point, they're able to accept and love their children better, and they're able to be happier themselves in their experience of parenthood.
You say this another way somewhere, I think page 43, I'm not sure. You say, it is not suffering that is precious, but the concentric pearlescence with which we contain it. We all have our darkness. We all have our darkness. And the trick is making something exalted of it. And paying attention to something else, like fixing something that can be fixed.
Right. So that really was where I came out in the end, was how do you manage to transform your suffering? And it takes a lot of doing. And one of the mothers I most admired said to me, it's not that I think God had a purpose for us in this. It's that I think you can find a purpose in it if that's what you want to do. And that's what I was chronicling.
He's also chronicling the experiences of people that, I don't know, after you read about him here, you might want to meet him. Maybe we will someday.
I loved many of the people I interviewed. They were a fantastic crowd.
Stay tuned. We'll be back shortly.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Hey, this is turning into a special program, and I'm sure the reason for that is we have a special guest who's written a very special book. The book is called Far from the Tree, Parents, Children, and the Search for Identity. The author is Andrew Solomon, and a rather well-known public figure had something nice to say about this book. You may remember him, a fellow by the name of Bill Clinton. In Far from the Tree, he writes, Andrew Solomon reminds us that nothing is more powerful in a child's development than the love of a parent. This remarkable new book introduces us to mothers and fathers across America, many in circumstances the rest of us can hardly imagine, who, these parents, are making their children feel special no matter what challenges come their way. Yeah, the real heroes here are the parents. I mean, forget the doctors and forget the guy who comes in to write a fat book about them. The real heroes are the parents. The thing that astounds me about this book is that it's chock full of information, and yet it's beautifully written.
Thank you.
And I want you to prove it by reading the very end of the book.
I will do that. Sometimes people end up thankful for what they mourned. You cannot achieve this state by seeking tragedy, but you can keep yourself open more to sorrow's richness than to unmediated despair. Tragedies with happy endings may be sentimental tripe, or they may be the true meaning of love. Insofar as I have written a self-help book, it is a how-to manual for receptivity, a description of how to tolerate what cannot be cured, and an argument that cures are not always appropriate even when they are feasible. As the jagged Alps are to the romantic sublime, so this curious joy is to the character of these families, nearly impossible, terrible, and terribly beautiful. Given how unimaginable my family would have been 50 years ago, I have no choice but to champion progress. Change has been good to me, and I am indebted to it. I hope these stories will contribute to the cataract that is honing the rough surface of the world. Until the planet grows smooth, however, love will continue to toughen under siege. The very threats to love strengthen it, even as they suffuse it with pain. In the harsh moments of loss that are my topic here, love manacles a tender heart. I felt something brilliant and terrifying for my son as he lay in the Star Trek-like CAT scanner that I had not yet felt for little Blaine, who had not encountered such adversity, or for Oliver and Lucy, who were already themselves when I got to know them. It changed my relationship to them all. Children ensnared me the moment I connected fatherhood with loss, but I am not sure I would have noticed that if I hadn't been immersed in this research. Encountering so much strange love, I fell into its bewitching patterns, and saw how splendor can illuminate even the most abject vulnerabilities. I had witnessed and learned the terrifying joy of unbearable responsibility, recognized how it conquers everything else. Sometimes I had thought the heroic parents in this book were fools, enslaving themselves to a life's journey with their alien children, trying to breed identity out of misery. I was startled to learn that my research had built me a plank, and that I was ready to join them on their ship.
So you got more out of the book than anybody else will. Huh?
I got a lot out of it.
Yeah. One of the marvelous phrases in that part that you read is strange love. Strange love.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe all love is strange, but certainly the love that we're talking about here, that these parents have for these special kids, is strange.
You know, I thought that at the beginning, and I kept thinking when parents said to me, but I love my children so much I would never have wanted to have any other children. And I thought, come on, your child has this terrible problem. Of course you would have wanted to have some other child. But when I thought about it, I thought, you know, all of us have children who are flawed, and most of us love those children. And if some glorious angel fell through my living room ceiling and said, I'm going to exchange your children for better, nicer, more attractive children, I would still think that that wasn't such a great arrangement. You love the ones you've taken care of.
It says here in this sheet that the publisher sent me that to mark the publication of this landmark work, Scribner has entered a unique collaboration with major web design firm Domani, sounds like spaghetti to me, to create a website, farfromthetree.com, which will feature select quotes from the book, photos of many of the book's subjects, etc., etc. And it will have ongoing stuff besides?
It'll be a place where people can find community. The book is about families who experience isolation and loneliness in the various conditions they're negotiating, and the website is a place where people can post their stories, comment on other people's stories, communicate with one another. You can get a feeling for the book from it, but you can also get a feeling for the vitality of experience that might actually make your experience easier. And I want to encourage listeners and everyone to post there and to be there. We're hoping to build a better world there.
Far from the Tree, Parents, Children in the Search for Identity by Andrew Solomon. We've been talking about it today on Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.